Hi, good evening everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, 3 chapters per day. And today is the number 75 Shiur in Rambam of this cycle. I received a story from my nephew Israel Noach from New York. He sent me the following story. It was a young couple on the way to their wedding. Tragically, they died in an accident, and since they died, they found themselves outside the gates of heaven, and while their angel came, they asked him, since they were on the way to get married, can they get married in heaven? So he says, okay, I'll never received such a strange request, but I'm gonna go find out. They sit, they wait. After 3 months he comes back. He says, yes, I received permission and I got you someone who will officiate the wedding. They were so happy, and then they turned for around. He says, but just in case, if it doesn't work out. Suddenly they see the angel got so angry. He says, why are you angry? We were just asking a question. He says, took me 3 months to find in heaven one rabbi. Can you imagine how long it will take me to find a lawyer for the divorce? Happens to be a very well connected story to our situation, to our subject in the first chapter of the Rambam today, which deals with the issue when a person passes away, and as everybody who ever participated on a Jewish wedding, and he read and he heard how the Ketubah is being read, and there is a statement in the Ketubah that said, Kol nechosin, all my assets, going to be secured, going to be linked, going to be as a collateral for the Ketubah while I am alive and after my death. So therefore, when a lady finds herself a widow after the death of the husband, and she is able to claim, or it is up to her whether to claim the entire amount of the Ketubah, but at that point on, she won't be able to be fed from his assets, or she has a choice at the meantime to sit and to be fed from his assets. It's called Tno'i Ketubah. So in our case, in the 19th chapter of Ishut, of the 17th chapter of the Ishut, which is the first chapter of today, deals when an individual passes and there is more than just one creditor after his assets. Sometimes there is just creditors. Sometimes there is creditors and one wife, and sometimes there is creditors with few wives, and sometimes there is only few wives. So it is important to make a distinction that given the fact that any creditor indeed extended real cash dollars, and right now he is going after the asset, while the lady is not really extended real cash dollars, all what she is collecting is a promise, a commitment that he will give, or she will be entitled to the Ketubah. But given the fact that there is a statement that more than what a husband wants to marry a wife a wife wants to be married more than a husband. So for that reason, if there is a competition over the assets, over the estate, between a creditor and between the wife, the creditor will have a priority over the wife. And again, for the reason, because the creditor was extending real dollars, where all she have contributing is a mutual life together, what she desires anyway. The entire concept of the Ketubah, in order to impose upon her husband a situation that it's not to be light for him to divorce her, but when it comes in a conflict between her and the creditor will win. Then there is a second scenario where a person was married to a few wives, and the situation is that after his death they going after the assets, after the estate. So the question, who is there, who gets a priority over his assets? So depends when did he receive the asset. If those assets that they are going after were there when he married the first one, and then he married the second one, so obviously the first one has a priority access to his assets, since chronologically she was first before the second lady. However, if a person married a few ladies and only then he received or acquired assets, and those assets right now they are a collateral for the Ketubah, so therefore their right to a lien over the assets as payment for the Ketubah after the death is a equal right. So therefore, if there is sufficient assets, so they will take each and every one the amount that they deserve to get. The conflict or the complexity gets a little bit interesting when the amount, the claim, the accumulated claim between all the lady after the assets exceeds the amount of the available assets. For example, let's say he had 4 wives. To one lady, he stated in the Ketubah $100. To the second, $200. To the third, $300. And to the fourth, $400. So altogether, we have over here $1,000. Now, in reality, all what is left over here is only $800. So the greatest dilemma, how the distribution of the assets available will take place, because after all, we want to share with you, before we're going to get to the deal, once in a Farbrengen, I heard from the Lubavitch Rebbe a very interesting question. The Rebbe was asking, how is it possible that many times when a person finds he goes to the rabbi with a question about a chicken that was just slaughtered, and there is a dilemma whether he is kosher or not. And the rabbi investigates the kashrus of the chicken, and he determines, and sometimes it's not a chicken, sometimes it's a big animal, sometimes it can be a cow, and he decides that it's not kosher. And the loss can amount to a huge loss. But the person will accept the judgment, the ruling without any problem, without any hesitance. Yet sometimes the same individual going to have a financial fight with his friends about a financial matter, and they're going to go to the same rabbi, to a din Torah, to a judgment. He should make a ruling who is right, and the amount that will be involved will be a much smaller amount than the value of the cow. And the rabbi will make a judgment where one person, he is entitled, and the other person, he is not entitled to the amount. The type of frustration that the losing party will have towards the rabbi, the anger, the resentment, and the general not being pleasant with the ruling will be way more, though it is a smaller amount. But while the animal turns out to be treif, he's okay with it, although it is a big amount. And while he happens to be the losing party in a conflict of a financial issue, he's going to get upset. And the answer that the person doesn't care of him losing the money. What he cares more about the other party winning the case. That's a nature of human being, and for that reason, when we come to solve a case where there are two ladies who were married to one person, who were about to go after the assets, and when the accumulated amount that is due to them exceeds the amount that is available from the current estate that was left by him. And as we gave an example, there are four ladies, one of them 100, 200, 300, 400, a total of 1,000, and available assets is 800. Now, if we're going to say, well, we should go and take the amount available and divide it equally amongst four ladies. So we'll take the available 800 and we'll give to each and every lady 200. So it will be very, very unfair, because some ladies will receive way less than is due to them, and other ladies will receive way more that was owed to them to begin with. So the discrepancy of injustice will be over here totally unacceptable. There is a possibility to make a calculation of percentage-wise, but the Rambam takes a very interesting approach, and the way that it's going to get done, it's going to go like this. I'm going to go make sure, in a case that say 800 is available and four ladies, I am going to take 400 out of the 800 that is available and give to each and every one 100. To the lady that received 100, 100, the lady that received 200, 100, the lady who received 300, 100, and the lady who received 400, 100. At this point, so the lady that received the smallest amount that was due to the lady that 100 was owed to her, I can send her away. You receive your entire amount, you can go away. Then there is still 400 left and three ladies around here. So I'm taking additional 300, because right now I have three ladies and I have 400 left, but I'm taking out of 400 only 300, and again I'm giving 100, 100, 100. So again I'm moving from the sequence over here. The lady who was owed to her 200, she has already 200 in her pocket, and I'm sending her away. Then what is left? Two ladies and $100 left. So I'm taking the $100 and I'm dividing it between the two ladies. So that way, two of the two original ladies received their entire amount. The poorest ladies, they received their entire amount. The richest ladies, though that they happened to come up with the smaller amount that was promised to them, but at least they were participating in 3 distribution events. So somehow the participation in the 3 distribution events somehow will compensate for their frustration of coming back from their amount. So that's how, it's a very interesting model that the Rambam chooses, where both fairness on one hand, justice on the other hand, and a good outcome, socially acceptable on the third hand. In fact, the Nobel Prize winner of Israel, of Professor Bauman, he has an entire lecture and an essay about this receivership that taking place in a context of Ketubah, and he shows how mathematically, because his expertise, mathematics, statistics, and he received a Nobel Prize for the Torah, for the theory of the games, the game theory that he advanced over there. So he has an entire explanation how even mathematically this type of model is the most brilliant model that exists, even not necessarily from a Torah point of view, but even from a scientific point of view. Just, it's been a long time ago I heard it, so I don't remember the details, but that's the general idea. In the thing, there is another discussion at the end of the first chapter about if a person was guaranteeing the Ketubah to the lady. Can she go after the guarantor or not? So the general distinction, what type of guarantor was the person who guaranteed the Ketubah? There is 2 types of a guarantor. There is one type of a guarantor that he says, I will be a guarantor and you should give her. In such a case, he is not going to be liable to pay the Ketubah, because again, from the same principle as we stated before, that this lady, contrary to a typical creditor who actually extends an amount of money, this guarantor, he is just encouraging the lady to do something that she's urging to do anyway, because there is a statement by Chazal, Yoter more than the Isha, as we stated before in a different context, more than the husband wants to marry, the lady wants to be married. Which reminds me a very interesting story that I heard once upon a time in Tel Aviv, in Israel, in the early days of the Chabad shul there in a Farbrengen, in Yotes Kislev. They invited many dignitaries to participate in the Farbrengen. And one of the spokespeople over there, he forgot to put a period to his words, and he kept speaking and speaking and speaking. And one of the organizers, he was a big Chassid, Rabbi Zislin, he says, I want to ask you a question, since you are such a great person. There is seemingly a contradiction in the words of our sages. On one hand, there is a famous saying by Chazal that right now we have just encountered, that more than the husband wants to marry a lady is more interested to stay married to her husband. Then there is another statement in Chazal that more than the calf would like to be fed by the cow is more interested to feed her calf. So we have a contradiction. On one hand, we see that the person who is giving, who is in the state of giving, of bringing the flow, he is more desiring to give. And on the other hand, in a context of a marriage, since the general feminine nature is to be on the receiving end, so we see, so what is more important? Is it nature of a human being to be on the receiving end or on the giving end? So he says, well, if we're going to pay attention, depends what we're talking over here. If we're talking over here about an animal, so the giver has a bigger urge than to receive. If we're talking over here, a human being, the receiver has more interest in to receive than to give. So he says to the speaker, you gotta decide to what type of a category you belong. If you belong to the human species or you belong to the animal kingdom. That was a way sort of to remind him in the context. There is another discussion in this particular chapter when a person sells an asset. And as we said before, that all the assets of a person are under a lien of the Ketubah, because they are all guaranteeing the Ketubah. So here a person has a property and he's about to sell the property. And then the prospective buyer, before he buys or after he buys, he receives a consent of the lady that she waives her lien on the field that he is about to purchase from her husband. In other words, any prospective buyer who purchasing any property from any person who is married, he is concerned what will be if tomorrow he will divorce his wife. What will be if tomorrow the person dies and the lady going to have a lien on the property that he purchases. So he goes to the lady and he asks her, I would love to purchase the property, but I'm concerned about your lien that you will have over this property. Can you do something? So there is a very interesting ruling. Sometimes, even if she verbally expresses a waive of the lien that she has over the field, she can always explain, though she declared it, but she did not really meant it, since she wanted to keep a peaceful environment between her and her husband. That's what I would love to. However, sometimes she cannot use such an excuse, because if, for example, a situation where a husband was about to sell a property and she loud and clear have warned the prospective buyer that she has a lien over the property, and for some reason the deal did not went through, but then there is a second deal where she has declared that it's okay to go with the sale. Such a lady cannot claim that the entire reason that she consented was in order to keep peaceful and a nice environment, because her action at the past are testifying loudly, speaks volume, that when she's protesting, she's capable to protest. And when therefore, if she's capable to protest, and yet she expressed a consent, so the consent is real. The consent cannot be interpreted just as a show. So therefore, each and every situation is being dealt differently. As opening to the second chapter of today's Rambam, I remind that myself, once upon a time, lived over here in town, a person who learned in the old home in the Shiva in Otvotsk, and when he was in town, he was in the business of the cemetery. He met an old friend of his, and he says, I'm wondering how you're able emotionally to deal with dead people. And he answered him, he says, I wish I would have been dealing with dead people, then I would be calmer. My problem that I'm dealing with the living relatives of the dead people, and therefore it's a very stormy situation. So it's a totally different story altogether. There is no dealing with the dead people. I remember this story because basically today, the second chapter of the Rambam deals with one other conditions of the Ketubah. As we said before, there is the actual Ketubah and there is the Tnoi Ketubah. The actual Ketubah is the stated amount of 100 to 200 that any lady is entitled to collect in a case of a divorce or a death of her husband. So this is the Ketubah. But then there is the Tnai Ketubah. Tnai is, it's stated in the document of the Ketubah. Sometimes it's not even stated, but it's clearly, as we said, it's a rabbinical liability that the husband accepts upon himself or upon his estate, upon his assets. One of them is the right of the widow. In case she decides she doesn't want to collect the Ketubah, she wants to stay in the house of the deceased person and being fed for all her needs, for the food, for garments, and all other living expenses. She has a right to do so until she will be eating out or decaying the assets until they reach the amount equivalent to her Ketubah, and then she collects the rest. That's the idea. So it's called Mezonos ho almono. Mezonos is the living expenses of the widow that she is entitled to live. Now she's basically competing with the orphans, with the legal heirs of the deceased one. So they are obligated to host her in certain condition physically in their house. Sometimes she may have a legit demand that she doesn't want to live with them in case that she is young and they are young and she is afraid from bad rumors that may spread, so she is entitled to her separate dwelling place, and they must to provide her with a separate dwelling place. They may claim that given the fact when people are living together and they buy wholesale, so their saving amount when they buying, let's say for 5 people, will, let's say, require them to buy only 4 kilos. Each and every person separately will buy 1 kilo, but 5 people together, they can get away with 4 kilo to pay for the amount of 4 kilo. So they may have a claim, listen, you're not living with us, But since you are living separately, we will not going to pay you retail, but we will give you the amount wholesale that is reflecting from a wholesale perspective your cost of living. That's a claim that they may have. Same way as in exchange for her receiving her living expense for them, they are entitled to benefit from the revenue she generates from whether business or any type of services or products she is able to produce. However, any metzio, any finding that she finds, contrary to the right of a husband to be entitled to any finding that a lady finds, they don't have a right to the findings that the widow is finding. It is also very important, but before she is in fact getting the living expenses from the orphans, she must swear in Bet Din that she has not yet collected her Ketubah. Why is it important for her to swear? Because there is a general rule. I'm not allowed to give access to any assets with a link to orphans without a shvuah. Since Beit Din is the father, the caretaker of the orphans, so therefore part of the procedure that she will be entitled to live with them and get her living expenses is by having a shvuah. There is a very interesting case of a conflict between the orphans and the widow, where the widow claims she has not received her living expenses yet, and the orphans claim that they already paid. To who should I believe? And the answer is, depends whether she have married with a new husband or not. As long as she has not married with a new husband, I will believe her. After she is already married with a husband, the burden of proof is upon her, and therefore I will believe them. Because each and every case, I will side with the higher likelihood, and again with the definition of the default situation of their chazokah. The third chapter is dealing with a very interesting condition of the Tnoi Ksuva. Part of the conditions of the Ketubah is called Ksuvas Bonin Dichrin. Male children, male sons, they have a right to go and collect the Ketubah of their deceased mother after she has died, before the inheritance process takes place. I'll give you an example. A person was married to a lady, and the lady gave him a boy, and the lady died. Now, since she died while he is alive, so actually, physically, he doesn't need to give Ketubah, because the actual Ketubah is being collected only if he dies before her or divorce. So here she died before him, and it was no divorce. However, let's say he marries to another lady, and from the other lady he has another child, and in this and the lady, he gave her 200, he promised her 200 in the Ketubah. And again, he died, and the other lady died, and now their children of the one husband and the two ladies, they're about to divide their assets. So the ruling is, before they dividing their inheritance, each and every one is entitled first to collect the amount that was stated in the Ketubah of his mother. So child who came from lady number 1, first he gets his, let's say the Ketubah was 100, he's 100. The second lady, the second boy who came from the marriage of the second lady, he collects his 200. Let's say if something was left additional, let's say another $100, so then the last $100, they will divide amongst them 50-50, like any type of inheritance. And the reason that I'm saying it, in this weekly parasha, in fact of today's parasha, we read in the Torah all the rules of inheritance. The concept of inheritance, it's a biblical concept who came as a response to the claim of the daughters of Tzlofchad. Everybody who read today's parasha knows very well that they came with Moshe Rabbeinu with a legit demand, claim. Since our father died and no male boys was left, why would be discriminated? And therefore, as a result, God Almighty introduced all the rules of Yerusha, all the rules of inheritance. Inheritance is something that is biblically. Inheritance is something that is biblically. The right to collect the Ketubah is something that is rabbinically. So as long that after distributing to those male boys the share of the Ketubah of their deceased mother will be something left to fulfill the commandments of nachalot, of inheritance, that's fine. But if there is no amount will be left, so a rabbinical institution cannot cancel a biblical obligation. So I make a major distinction if there is sufficient funds left in order to honor and to respect biblical and rabbinical obligation. But if there is no sufficient fund, I will waive the rabbinical obligation and will stick with the biblical obligation. There is also a very interesting other ruling where the daughters of the lady entitled also to live and get their living expenses until or they get engaged or they becoming adults. In fact, as we have learned, generally adult by a female, it is after 12 and a half years, subject to the fact that they have all the signs of adulthood, all the physiological signs of adulthood that were already stated in the second chapter of Hilchos Ishut. Now, again, what happens if there is no sufficient of money left in order to get to the boys their living expenses and to the little girls their living expenses? So the ruling is that the boys, though they are entitled to a biblical inheritance, they should go and beg for money on the street and have their sister, small girls, being fed for the living expenses from the estate of their parents. And the same thing applies as well if over the same estate there is a competition between the widow lady and the orphan girls. There is an X amount of money. So the question, who will be the one who stays in the house and lives, and who is the one who will go outside and beg? And the answer, I will make sure that the widow stays in the house and gets her living expense, and the girls, they will be the one who are begging on the street. I will conclude with a very interesting vote that I heard from the Rebbe regarding the weekly portion, where it is also associated with the rulings of Yerusha, inheritance. We have learned that the daughters of Tzlofchad, they came to Moshe Rabbeinu and they claimed that our father died in the desert, and he was not from the gang of Korach who were having a rampage against you, but he died on his own sin. And the problem that he had no boys and all he left is a daughter, and why should we be treated differently? On one hand, we cannot marry into another tribe, on the other hand, we cannot inherit it. The entire claim. And the Torah tells us Moshe Rabbeinu removed himself from making a judgment, and he presented the case to God Almighty. And the question is why? And I heard many years ago, it was on a Simchas Beis HaShoevo, somewhere in the 80s, maybe 86 or 87, the Rebbe said the following explanation. When we're talking about for not being biased, not to being bribed, bribery is not necessarily when it comes to currency of money. Bribe can be a good compliment, a good word, a pleasant stroke over the shoulder. And when Moshe Rabbeinu heard in the words of presentation that their father have died for his own sin, but further than this, he was on your good side. He was not ganging up on you like Korach. He felt that those words are like bribery. So therefore he's not gonna be impartial. He will be already biased. So therefore he's not qualified any longer to make any judgment. For that reason, he presented their case God Almighty. Think for a second. We're talking over here about the greatest giants of all time, the greatest prophet who ever lived on planet Earth, and a case that took place already 40 years ago. Since then, so many events, and it's not directly, it's only their father. Nevertheless, he felt even such a sentence is already softening his heart, already makes him not qualified, not fit to give a objective ruling on this case, which teaches us how careful we have to be when we are judging anything, how really objectively and how really biased our judgment it is.
You don't have answer.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. That's why the Torah tells us even such a story, even the lessons we can derive from stories are so powerful that the only way to get them across to us is via a story. So again, thank you very, very much. Yeah, and
One more person.
yeah.